Good morning. Thank you all for being here with us today, both in person and in our Zoom. We have a group of us put together here to discuss kind of like a roundtable, open forum type of discussion, if you will, on artificial intelligence in education and how does racial bias play a huge role into all of this, and how does algorithms also form into that discussion. So I want to take a first brief moment to give some space to Carl Welch over here to introduce himself, who is our partner in crime in STEMentors nonprofit that is a huge part of our community on campus, and the main spearhead in putting together the Possible Self event, which, by the way, is happening tomorrow, Saturday, May the 4th, be with you in the morning rain now. It will still be an amazing event. And Carl, why don't you say a few words?
I'm not sure where to look at, but welcome everybody. I think it's really important for me because one, I want Possible Self to be a part of everything and STEM Mentor to be a part of everything that Foothill is doing. Part of the things that we're talking about now, which is very important, is AI. One time, Ethan, which you all will meet later, and a couple other friends of ours were sitting at 12 o'clock at night going through, remember the GPT and Yahoo and doing searches. And we did searches for specific things that brought out some of this absolutely incredible result, which shows me that there's a huge racial bias in a lot of the AI and ML and all this kind of stuff. I want to have this event as part of Possible Self because I wanted us to understand that one, in education, which we're talking about, the value of AI, the value of GPT and all these kind of things. But there's a huge value in specific demographics and specific communities. In some communities, it has no value because one, they don't know anything about it. Two, they don't have the internet in order to connect to it. Three, they don't have any knowledge on how to use it, especially for their value. And four, if someone else does and they don't, these specific communities don't, then that's going to create a chasm, not just a gap, but a chasm. And I want this to be the beginning of that conversation to say, how are we going to utilize AI in education, which again, is what you guys talk about every Friday. But also, because we're going to utilize it, there are huge gaps that's going to create lack of education in specific communities when it comes to not just education, but jobs and all these kinds of things. So this is what I want to be the foundation of a conversation for to continue here at Foothill College.
Thank you very much, Carl, for setting the stage here and also for bringing us all together for this possibility. I think maybe it would be good for us to just to kind of briefly go around the room and introduce ourselves, and then also the folks in Zoom, so we can get started in that conversation. And maybe we want to circle directly to my right is a guest, Ethan Berry. If you want to say a few words.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Carl and everyone. Anytime there's an opportunity to help kids get a better education and be more full citizens and opposed to broken citizens, I'm in. And so I am thrilled to be.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about your background?
Oh, sure. I have a double E computer science education. I work for 4 startup companies right on the university, 3 of which were successful. Intuit, Veteran Computing, which got bought out by a bigger networking company, and Maxis Gaming. I'm a serial entrepreneur. We also have a nonprofit organization in which we provide mentor training, life skills, behavioral kind of growing up and being responsible for your own actions type of training, as well as STEM-based curriculum that we help students understand and feel good about learning.
Thank you very much. And we're just gonna go in a quick circle here. Some of us, we know each other already. I'm Zach. I am your STEM dean at Foothill College, and pass it over next.
I'm Lawrence, I teach in the business department.
I'm Mike Murphy. I teach in the computer science department, and I'm a great fan of Carl Welch. Everything he does is awesome, and that's why I'm here.
I'm Bob Cormier. I teach chemistry. I'm also secretary treasurer, academic senate, and I work with our facilities group, monitoring our energy and coming up with greenhouse gas strategies.
Constantine Kalavidis, program coordinator for the LRC STEM Tutoring Center and also for the Emerging Technologies Institute.
I'm Sophia Kim. I work with the Science Learning Institute here, and the mission of SLI is to advance diversity and equity in STEM. I'm glad to be here.
I'm Pooja Mata, and I'm a mom whose kids have gone back to college, and I have always loved computer science and very interested in learning more about AI. And I feel like it's almost, it was meant to be when I was here, because I volunteer a lot with a non-for-profit organization in India that teaches students computer science and especially special needs students. So I feel like this feels almost like it was karma that I was supposed to be here today.
Thank you for joining us. And folks in Zoom, if you could maybe just briefly introduce yourselves as well. I want to hand it off to Lene, and you can just take turns.
Hi, I'm Lene Whitley-Putz, Dean of Online Learning.
Thanks, Lene. Carrie?
Hi, y'all. Ryer. I teach political science.
Thank you. Jessica?
Hi, my name's Jessa. I teach English, Women's Studies, and Asian American and Asian Studies.
For joining us. Diana?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Diana Alves de Lima, and I'm the co-director of the Student Success Center at De Anza College. And I'm just curious about all things AI.
Thank you. And Lakshmi Kanta? Oh, you're muted.
Oh, you're on mute. Lakshmi Kanta, you're on mute.
There you go.
Thank you. It's always a problem. Lakshmikanta Sengupta, De Anza College, biology department. I'm a biologist, so not really having a lot of knowledge about algorithm and things. So, but I'm the user, and I want my students to use AI in medical science. A lot of applications are there, so they should be ready for joining that workforce using AI tools. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us. I believe that's everyone. And we do have some expected other guests coming in physically. So once those guests get here, we'll be sure to take a moment to introduce them as well. And so we're going to take the rest of the time here today until about 1 o'clock. We'll just have a conversation. And that conversation can be gauged around AI, obviously, but focusing on the 3 topics that are in the title of that discussion today: education, racial bias, and algorithms. Some of which have more knowledge than others on these topics. And so since we're here at an institution that is focused on education, I think it's really important that we have these conversations on how AI is affecting not only our work, but how it is going to affect our students' work, and in specific, what kind of barriers are different populations going to face? How is that going to impact how they learn, how they gain skills and go into the workforce? And what can we do to help bridge those barriers? So I'm just going to open it with that. And I think anyone who wants to go wherever we want with this conversation should feel free to go there. I'm here to mostly facilitate today. So that's my starting spiel.
Well, I'll start it just for the sake of, and Ethan, I hope you don't mind us talking about the conversation we've had. We had a conversation with 4 guys, all 4 of them, well, 3 of them are brilliant and work in the tech field, and then there was me, I was 4th. We were just talking about all things, and we did a search. And the search was, we said, well, we want to see what the internet thinks about Black men versus white men. So we did a search where we said, Black men are. And then it came back, Black men are gangbangers, Black men are crooks, Black men are athletes, Black men are entertainers, those type of things. And then when it said white men are, remember, it came back, white men are businessmen, white men are this, white men are that. So that whole black white thing came out of just a search off of, it was the ChatGPT and other search engines that we looked at. And that makes me think how Constantine and I always talk about how as global citizens, we want to make sure that we create equity. But I don't think that those who are creating the AI, and I don't know much about it to say it correctly, but those who are creating AI is going to create a huge chasm between the haves and the have-nots. It could be black and white, it could be rich and poor, it could be Americans and Indians, it can be anything, but it's going to create a chasm. And I think that has a lot to do with education, how we utilize it in education, and are allowed to utilize it in education. And if we utilize it in education, and then if a black kid that comes from a low socioeconomic background does something and he writes it and he turns it in, and a white kid does the same thing, and an Asian kid does it, and a Latin kid, who are they gonna not believe did it the correct way? So how we use it in education and how it's built, I think is valuable, it's incredible, because it can create a huge chasm, and we've got enough trouble and problems in the world to where we can't allow technology to do that. So I know we talk about education here all the time and how you guys are going to use it, what you accept and what you don't accept. So I kind of want to throw that out there too. How do you guys think? What do you think accepting it in education will help or hurt? Not just black and white and poor, but just how is it going to help or hurt students?
I'd like to talk about skepticism of skepticism. When Mike insisted that I join this panel, and I appreciate that because over a year ago, Mike got me into GPT and AI. I thought, okay, I see the direction where this is going. I really want to step up and I want to defend these tools and talk about what I see as a barrier the students are adopting or students are preventing them from adopting this. And so a little history, if we go back 30 years to the beginning of the World Wide Web, was a graphical user interface to the internet. It was an explosion of worldwide access to information. Anyone could get access to it, and it allowed education and opportunity to spread. 30 years later, we're looking at the emergence of GPT, large language models, and public access to reasoning engines. Generative transformer tools, compute. It's a similar revolution in information technology. If 1993 was a revolution in access to information, 2020s are a revolution in access to intelligence. And that is a huge step function. If we look at the combination of big data, compute, machine learning, AI algorithms, and combine these, it's going to accelerate human evolution. And I had this conversation with Simon maybe 15 minutes ago in a very short period of time. What can AI tools bring us? We talk about how it can help learning, accelerating cures for cancer, drug discovery, aging, energy, climate change, and automation of drudgery, right, as we're all learning. Are there reasons for concern? Absolutely. But I would not like to see, don't let reasonable concerns get in the way of unhelpful skepticism. Lean into this, spend time, and bring some patience. This only happens once in a lifetime. I say this because I had half a dozen of my smartest chemistry students last quarter telling me that they were hesitant to try AI tools because of what they had heard about it. And so the skepticism wave has created this barrier, right? It creates this wall that's preventing students from getting in there and exploring with it. And so I'm just going to leave these introductory remarks for here and later share how AI tools can help students with tutoring. They can help them rapidly search document space and it can help them write much better than they could on their own. And thank you, Mike, for being this.
I think Mike is implying that you're next.
I was. Gentle nudge.
I guess I don't have a lot of really general things to say, but part of the discussion, some part of the skepticism about using AI and using ChatGPT reminds me I think it was in the sixties, where TI announced the first TI-10 calculator that did addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and squares and square roots. And we all thought that people were going to lose basic math skills. If they use this handheld calculator, they would no longer be able to do arithmetic. And I think we have to realize that ChatGPT is going to extend what we're doing. It's not going to dumb us out. It's going to make us smarter. And I think we have to constantly realize that. This whole ethics thing it's really starting to bother me, because the big vendors in AI are paying lip service to the notion that they are setting ethics policies, but they're not effective. Carl, when was the query? When did you do it?
3 months ago? 3 or 4 months ago?
That's been known for a year and a half. And I thought that had been corrected. I thought, so basically the machine learning models that the vendors are using happen to have unrepresentative information about blacks. It wasn't that the algorithm is discriminating. It's the fact that the learning tools that we're using were not complete. It turned out we're finding more pictures of white businessmen than there were of black businessmen, or at least whoever provided the input was more interested in dealing with the white community than the black community.
And that's exactly it. Whoever's providing that information, and whether it's algorithm or people that work in the industry, and part of that whole thing is having equity in the industry so that we have a diversity, whether it's women or men or people from an alternative lifestyle or people from outside the country. We have to have that type of diversity. Otherwise,
the most generic source of information is Google searches.
Mhm.
That's a huge source of information. And it's over time, I guess it'll get better, but I think we have to proactively do things to make it better now.
Mhm. Exactly. And that's the conversation today. You know, how do we do that? Or are we doing that? Or what's the reason to do that? You know,
What I'm gonna say is something I hadn't really decided to say, but now I'm going to. I was trying to get a colleague to join us at this meeting, a computer science instructor, who I really wanted to have come to the meeting. And he said, I don't want to go to a meeting that's talking about discrimination and ethics. It's not part of the technical equation. And I will certainly get back to him, we will argue that at some point, but I was just amazed, he didn't like the title of your meeting and therefore would not come to it. And I think there's probably quite a bit of that out there in the world, and we have to be conscious of it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to face the reality that this, and avoiding that conversation is necessarily helping.
and that's our reality. I'm sorry, could you go ahead? No, that's our reality. As much as people don't want to talk about ethics and racial or any type of biases, we have to live in that reality every single day. So when we come here and when we at home, or some of these kids that we work with, like Ethan worked with inner city kids and does a lot of work with STEM and these kids, if they have no knowledge of even what AI or ChatGPT does, or the value it can have, it can help them with their homework, it can help them with the resumes, it can help them get a job. They have no knowledge of that. But some other kid who grew up in both sides of those hills knows everything about it. That's the chasm that we keep talking about. And if people say, well, I'm tired of hearing about ethics and racial biases, that's the problem. Because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit the fact that there are problems and challenges. So how do we work on those problems and challenges? Ethan is brilliant. He's a good friend. He's so, I mean, and he teaches me an awful lot when I say something. He says, no, don't do it that way. Say it this way. Or don't do it that way. When you do it, calculate it that way. And I can accept that because I know he's coming from a place in his heart, right? There it says, okay, I want to make you better. That's what I think AI is doing for the world. It's making the world better, but it's leaving out a community that no one else is talking about.
it's not only that it makes the world better, but it can make the world.
You can, yes, sir.
If we're aware, right, and if we can take action. You started the conversation with the phrase that you typed into the search engine, black men are. People have done that with other phrases like successful people are. And then it comes up with, oh, these are business people, but they look mostly like they show older white people or people in certain situations that they're not representative of possibilities of what could happen. Being in the business department here at Foothill College, I think about AI education, but I also think about what happens when our students leave, they go out into the real world and how they can be successful. And I think that AI definitely could be one of those tools that that they can use, but they have to know how to do it, right? And so that's one of those things. There was this, I'm talking too much. There was this fear about is AI going to take over all of our jobs? And then we've started to hear things where people say, actually, it's not AI going to take over your jobs, it's the people who use AI going to take over your jobs, right? Because AI, what does it do? It helps you to analyze, summarize, optimize, forecast, generate, do things that you would normally do in your job. But if you take that and incorporate it into what you can do, you can be better. You can become, they talk about centaurs where you're part human, part machine together. We put it together, and that's where I think we should go.
Yeah. Constantine, you had something to say.
Yeah, I was gonna follow up on what Mike said and also now Carl and Lawrence. So I think we have to go up at a much higher level in terms of engineering and in terms of what we teach our students in science, technology, and so on. Because, okay, so I studied engineering, my degrees in engineering. I learned that, hey, you focus on engineering, period. That's all. You don't look left, you don't look right, you just look forward, you don't look behind what happened. You just keep marching forward. That's all. You don't take into account anything. You have a problem to solve, you find the root cause and then you solve it, and it's a technical problem. But right now, with artificial intelligence, you look at like Google, for instance, or other companies hiring philosophers, they're hiring social scientists and so on. So it's and then a lot of my friends, especially my friends of my generation, it's like nonsense. Philosophy should disappear. It's nonsense, which I totally 100% disagree with. These are brilliant engineers, but they have no concept of what's outside of that technical field. And they don't, when we develop something, you develop that for whether it's a weapon, whether it's a ChatGPT, whether it's some other tool, that's all you focus on. You don't take into account, well, what's the impact of this thing we're developing? Because engineers, nobody's encouraging engineers and scientists and so on to look at social sciences. In fact, it's sort of like, social science, history, philosophy, forget it. We're technical people, right? And I think that's the switch that I see happening in 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. I think that was the focus. Now you begin to see that there is combinations. Like you see public policy and data science. You see, history and engineering, right? So it's beginning to switch, it's beginning to change. USC has a program in public policy and data science now. Many others will catch up eventually, but I think, and at Foothill College, I mean, we have discussions in terms of like, how can you switch, the curriculum so that it does prepare the workforce for the future, but it's not going to be just a workforce, that focuses you exclusively on the technical side of things. It will be something that focuses you on the social sciences and other fields, interdisciplinary. So Zach is the dean, so you can, that's the kind of thing that you probably the challenges that you're faced with in terms of like how you switch this curriculum. And you Lawrence is an engineer, an electrical engineer, right? And you're in business. So you're combining different fields, and we have to do a lot more of them.
Great, a really good point, and I'm going to choose my words carefully because this is a recorded. I'm a lecturer at San Jose State. A year ago, I taught a course in carbon capture. It's a bit of a stretch. but being part of their family in chemical engineering, we have conversations about where does the department need to go. So part of our industry advisory board this year in February, we said, you guys need to be really all over this, right? And they're full-time faculty like we are. We take a job, we get in our discipline, and we kind of lose a little bit of touch with the rest of the world. But data science, and I'm mentoring a young student at Aragon, young man. And he said, you know, I'm looking at chemistry and I'm looking at data science, and I'm wondering where chem informatics is. Is it like one or the other? And I said, chemistry has become a data science, and engineering, right? Biology. We're modeling these processes, we're modeling our knowledge, and letting compute and intelligence help us with this. And for graduates now, with a bachelor's degree in San Jose State this year, next year, if you don't have a class in data science, some experience with chem informatics, these AI tools application, you're not going to be competitive. But more importantly, to your comment about chasm, this is hugely important. We have to be able to talk to computers and give it some programming, either in code or in a well-written prompt, to be able to leverage this intelligence. And I think, and I thought this, right? I took a course in Python. I skimmed it because I used GPT to help me get through the Python course. And I didn't learn enough. I took a course in machine learning, fell on my face, right? Flat on my face. And so it came back to, dang, I really need to learn how to talk with the computer, set up these environments. It's not terribly tricky, but if you can do that, this whole new world opens up to you, right? So as a chemist, now you're into chemistry and data science. And our labs are going to be fully automated. The workflows, even synthetic organic chemistry in 5 years, may be much more dominated by robots. And it's like, wow. So what do I need to do? I'm in college now. I want to be a chemist and science biologist in 25 years. We've got to embrace it. So we've got to really work back to populations, right, that didn't get enough math in K-12. That suffered more during COVID, cognitive learning loss, or just, you know, opportunity. And now they have all these tools, and the folks that can use these tools, they're just really leapfrogging ahead, and they're going to drive this. And so there will be a chasm there. And I don't know how we address it, right, Zach? We talked about like Python for all. How do we teach a course in programming that really starts, Mike, you know this, that really starts with what are the elements of programming? What are the elements in code? What are the elements? How do computers really work? And how can we learn to talk with them and not fear writing code, right? And get students up to that point where they're actually able to, you know, write little scripts.
Thank you, Bob. Any of you haven't had a chance? I'd like to chime in because several points have been raised, and the solutions have also been put forth. It has to be a combination of all the disciplines working together. I happened to, when I started my consulting business back in '96, work for companies that worked on the Human Genome Project. And so that was like the gate that really opened up this data science as a career field, because it had to be people that understood the science to come up with the algorithms that programmers put in the code to actually run on these big parallel servers to come up with the actual human genome, map. And without them working together, that would have never happened. And that's an example of how the technology actually helps us learn more because we can do more. A quick history lesson. before AI, there was databases. And the database was considered your artificial intelligence, right? You would type something in to, at your job. Whether it was filling out a form or retrieving some information. And it worked much like Google does, right? You just type something in, a whole bunch of stuff comes back and you sift through it, find out what's, more pertinent to what you need to have as a result, and you use that information. It's never going to be 100% perfect because all of this stuff is being done by human beings. And that's why it has the human biases within it. That doesn't make it scary for me. What that makes it is an opportunity for people like your group here to have these discussions and discuss how to incorporate more ideas from different people to engineer a better, aggregated, general purpose chatbot. It's all human written code, but it takes time for things to develop and get better. I mean, back in the early 90s when the internet first came out, it took about 10 years before they actually settled on a standard because there were tons of different, browsers and they all had different standards. And if you use one, you'd have to learn that one, use a different one, you have to learn how to use that one. And slowly but surely, they started to make standards for the browser technology. And now you have Google, who came up with a brilliant idea of being able to kind of take the browser technology and turn it into like a major information portal. That was Google's, mission statement in the beginning. After that, big data ensued because now you have all these people using the internet and all this data is going back and forth. They're like, Google isn't making any money at the time. They're like, how do we make money? And Facebook comes out. Now, Facebook wasn't the first social media platform out there. It learned from the previous attempts that, were tried in the marketplace. And, fortunately for them, a simple, concept of just keeping in contact with your friends and family made it palatable and understandable for people to use. And initially it was just for the college campus that Mark Zuckerberg went to. And then after he left and introduced it to the public, it spread like wildfire. All that to say that all of these technologies are headed for convergence. As you said, there's no doubt that every discipline is going to have to work with technology because it's just a tool to help you do your work better. And that needs to be in the curriculums, not just in the college curriculums, but in the K through 12 curriculums. Is my belief because they have to get ready for college. And if you don't know how to use these tools, it's gonna be a hindrance. But to the question of the biases within the technology itself, it's really important that we don't have a circular firing squad where the instructor that said he didn't want to come to this because they don't want to talk about it. It's really important that we don't like just dismiss him because he has that thought process, because in engineering, that's what we're taught. I mean, literally that follow the schematic. This is like what you are trained to do. So it's hard to transition sometimes. But I found that there's two types of engineers. There's the engineer that is brilliant and, you know, they just want to be left alone and to do their thing. And there's the engineer that is more socially oriented, where, you know, they tend to be more gregarious and try to think of ideas and concepts to use the engineering that they know to build products for the marketplace. And so I think that's where this ultimately ends up. If we want to make these tools better, then people from disparate groups have to be involved in building those tools. We can't sit back and say, well, there's bias, but we don't learn how to build the tool ourselves so that we can correct some of those biases by, you know, using data that we live with every day. And that's really what the issue is. If you don't know the data that other people deal with on a daily basis, then odds are you're not going to use it for your building of your, you know, AI chatbot or large language model. But it's not a, you know, zero-sum game. Technology is something that lowers the barrier to entry, that if you allow yourself to learn it, you can be just as creative as anyone else. And that's one of the things that my company is doing. We're working on collaborating with NVIDIA, OpenAI, and Meta to use like their large language models, DALL-E 3 and ChatGPT-4, to build new models with additional information that they may not have used to incorporate it and have a more robust, you know, information base to, you know, answer questions that people might ask.
Yeah.
I was gonna see if Sophia had any questions online.
No, yeah, Chessa has, yeah.
Oh,
Chessa, please.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I wanted to chime in and build off of some of the points people were making about the need for interdisciplinarity, because I'm an English teacher. I come from a humanities background. So when I talk about AI, when I think about AI, it's usually like the social impact, and especially in these days, the impact that it has on democracy, because this is a big election year, and it's, one of the things I study. And if we look at social media as like our first widespread experiment with AI, we can see what that has done for our democratic processes. And kind of the polarization that's been happening as a result. And part of that is, another way to think of AI bias is also the objective function, right, of the algorithm. So what is its goal? What is it designed to do? And social media was designed to engage us in whatever content it was. It didn't even care. It's just like, how does it keep our eyeballs in order for us to pay attention and so that the companies could make money off of it? And so, as we're kind of seeing the sort of the polarization that's been happening due to that objective function, I think it's also important to say that, like, we are able to give the tools a different objective. And I don't know if folks, heard about this study that was just done at Stanford about trying to infuse democratic values into an algorithm, into a social media algorithm. And it actually did sort of kind of nudge people more towards like engaging in politics in a more kind of like, less polarizing way, in a way that promotes like, more shared understanding and like communication. And so I think that, one of the ways that the people were able to do this, the folks who were studying it, was because they had a lot of input from social scientists who know how to code things like what is democratic behavior, what are democratic values. So it's like you might have a ton of data, but if you don't know how to code it in a way that is like, and then kind of create an objective that increases social good, then I think that it's like, what is the data really for? And to tie this all together, I think that's why it's really important for folks like us at community colleges, which are public institutions, hopefully designed for public good, like why we need to be having these conversations here, because, corporations, like obviously like their goal is to make money, but public institutions, our goal is hopefully, like improve people's quality of life, provide access to education. So, and also like my other plug for interdisciplinarity is like, it's great to have like a lot of engineers trying to solve this problem, but we do need the philosophers, we do need the teachers, the social scientists who have that other lens to say like, okay, you have all this data, you have these great tools, but what good are they? Like literally, what good do they do? That's all.
The organization that did that study is called the Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence at Stanford University. And I'm a member of that. And that's exactly what is going to happen in the next 10 years. Because this technology is moving so fast, a lot of it is being led by the major corporations whose objective is to make money. But now the education institutions need to get involved to actually, as she just said, use the technology for its goals. And that will make a sea change in terms of how education is done, number one, and also it will be a comparison for what corporations are doing. So on the one hand, the corporation wants to make money. On the other hand, educational institutions, their job is to educate, and civic engagement is one of those things that unfortunately in the K through 12 schools, they don't really teach that. And I don't know when that stopped, but the technology is an excellent way to reintroduce that. Because kids have a fascination with technology. And so it's a perfect tool to introduce them to learning about civics engagement. Our democratic process is built on being engaged, and all politics are local, and the more that happens, I think the more the social media world will change for the better.
Yes, please.
So what I understand is there's obviously a chasm that we're seeing. So is it, in your opinion, would it be that there's insufficient data or that the algorithm is not building into it a way to bridge this? Or is it then the data that is actually used to build the algorithm?
It's all of the above, in
It's-
my opinion.
Okay.
And an interesting thing left out, and I just want to throw this out for you to debate. Bias is built into training data, right? Bias is also built into language. And the large language models learn about the world through culture and through language, and that's built through history. But I had this notion, and I still do, that there's a lot of bias that's built into a prompt. And so I'm torturing my chemistry class because whenever someone asks a good question, I answer with a prompt. And I tell them, this is how you would approach it with context, direction, and intent. Who am I? What is it that I want to learn and why? But you have to reflect and then engage back and forth. And I think that without too much effort, as you folks found, you can get a response or a pattern match from a large language model that matches your bias, right? If you're looking for something, unless it's overtly off. And so I would really counsel students and everyone to learn how to write prompts and then really debate what you're seeing and have an interrogative with the model. So you mentioned data algorithms, but the user prompt is important. We're part of that reflection. The models reflect the training data, but they also, their response reflects our prompt.
So then, if the user prompt was used in a way that
Inspired bias.
inspires or
Yeah.
corroborates the user's bias, then would that just solve the problem right there, or?
Yeah. Spoiler alert. Search engines, as you folks astutely said with social media, search engines are designed to give results based on the user that they think will target those documents. And so as we know, and what are popular search engines, right? Google's, we go back to the site, Alta Vista, all of these. And if you come in with a biased prompt, the search engine was only too happy to fulfill your request with a biased response, right? And it's a perfect world. It's like, here's your pattern, that's what you asked, this is what I told you, right? Luckily, and I think large language models are better than this, I don't go in with a biased prompt, but I have gone in with some half-baked ideas in chemistry, some notions that were really off, and the model did not hesitate to point out my incorrectness.
Oh, it did, okay. Well, I think
And
that-
so then I interrogated it and I said, okay, this is where I'm off. Help me understand what I don't understand, right? But you have to have a dialogue with a large language model as if you're having a dialogue with a person. It is not I'm going to say this carefully. It is not an inanimate object. People might debate that, but it is not inanimate. It's very human in its design.
I just wanted to also welcome Eros. He is joining us here today as well. Thank you for joining us, Eros. Would you mind giving a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, I'm Eros, thank you, for sure. My name is Eros Marcello. I'm an AI ML design engineer, and a visiting research scholar here at Foothill, focusing on AI native neurotechnology, specifically applications for neural interfaces or brain computer interfaces as they're referred to as well. I'm based at NASA Ames Research Park, where I live and where I work out of, the residences there. And ex-Apple, ex-Meta, ex-Salesforce, ServiceNow, Samsung, and I've worked across multiple industry sectors, including the federal government, healthcare, medical, anything that human interfacing artificial intelligence tends to touch. And I've been doing this for 10 years, more or less. And that's really me in a nutshell.
It's a big nutshell.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eros, and certainly feel free to piggyback off of anything that was recently being said, if you had it.
Sure, I mean, there was, when it comes to AI ethics, I am, not to say that I'm removed from it, I did LLM safety at Meta, however, when you, I've talked to a lot of AI ethicists and AI fairness and inclusivity directors and what have you. And to this day, and this may be in opposition to a lot of perspectives, but if it's a hot take, it is what it is. But I've yet to get a solid answer as to what they do on a day-to-day basis at these large companies. They're often first in the chopping block. And to me, my understanding is they're extensions of PR at best. So
Absolutely.
a lot of their effectiveness is up to debate, and also arbitrary in the sense of, you know, who's assessing what algorithmic fairness and all of these buzzwords and terms mean. Algorithmic fairness to me is not reflecting, you know, modulating a computational process and perturbating it in a way that it reflects the current social, political, and socioeconomic climate. That's not algorithmic fairness. That's making sure something's. It's been said. You have to be aware when these companies say they are going to put guardrails on these models. They're more so saying they're going to put guardrails on you.
Yes.
So it's about they want. They're not trying to calibrate the model. They're trying to calibrate you and your opinions and your conjecture. So that's something to remain cognizant of, and whether or not you agree with certain socio-political issues or stances, remain aware of that. There's like a lot of talks about like these extreme edge cases of like the gentleman who asked about global warming and was eventually felt that he needed to commit suicide or attempt a suicidal act. Is that a model problem? Is that a AI ethics problem, or is it more so that there was other pre-existing issues? And I just see a lot of this like, we understand when a model hallucinates or produces erroneous output.
I like that term hallucinate, because we used to call them just bugs.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much a bug, it's just a byproduct of the architecture and structure of transformer-based neural network architectures. It's a largely like GPT 3.5 was like a word guesstimator performing matrix multiplication at very large rates. So I'm not saying that it's a slight technological feat, but a lot of these discussions sort of become an echo chamber that it's important to have these discussions, but then, these adversarial nation states and other countries or entrants into the AI ML race, they're not having these discussions. They're just rapidly innovating and pushing things. So we have to, I think, find the secret sauce that these don't create malignant artifacts that permeate throughout our society, but also we need to keep progress and momentum up as well. So I think that these tracks can coexist. Just think if there's an overemphasis on discussion of AI ethics, despite that it's illusory and no one can really agree on what that means, these philosophical debates can kind of live in orbit to actual rapid progress. I think that's the best formula and secret sauce to move ahead.
Zach, go. I'm sorry, I got to look back.
Yeah, so I work very closely with Eros, and I think earlier I made a comment, Eros, regarding the interdisciplinary nature of going forward, and I made a comment about being an engineer as well. That engineers do tend to be in a silo, and they focus so much on the technical that they lose the long term. So that's kind of going in a different direction than what we had stated in terms of like we can focus on the technical, but I think if we go up at a very high level and look at what's the future of humanity, I think you really need to bring in an interdisciplinary, like Ethan was saying too, and some of the other folks, an interdisciplinary nature to engineers. Engineers do focus on solving specific problems, but without that philosophy, without that, well, even symbolic logic, all of these aspects to engineering, I don't think humanity has a promising future. I think that developing technology for the sake of developing technology is not going to end well for humanity.
Sure, and I concur with you entirely with that, for sure. It's just like, as you said, it's the key word is multidisciplinary engineers.
Right.
So you can't philosophize or discuss a H100 cluster into performing the compute you need to train a certain model, you know what I mean? So at the end of the day, these conversations, I'm not saying that they're negative, I'm just saying that ultimately they are supplementary to what needs to be done, and that's there's a lot of work to get from Will Smith eating spaghetti to what Sora and these other open source and competing soda models are doing. You know, there's the discussion, as you can already see, is reactive rather than proactive. It's like, okay, we're done, we've done it. Now, how do we tame it? That's much more conducive, especially in somewhat of an AI arms race. As the saying goes, it's better to be a warrior in the garden than a gardener. So I think that's the best.
Let me ask you a question, follow, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
Follow up on that. Earlier, I made a comment about, the corporate objectives for making these transformers, large language models, the algorithms they use, all that stuff, versus what an education institution's objective might be. Right now, Meta is opening up its DALL-E 3 platform, which it just released a couple weeks ago, I think. So people can build their own customized large language model or a small language model. What do you think about institutions like education institutions being able to do that and parallel with what corporations are doing?
I mean, institutions have every God-given right to do that, and every resource as well, given that there's a huge open source contingency to this entire game right now.
Do you think that would
Are you saying, like, is it the responsibility of the institution to fashion their own LLM? We're trying to be clear on that.
I'm saying whatever the institution's objective may be, whether it's, better student output or, correcting some built-in biases, whatever that objective is, do you think institutions can do it, number one? And number two, should they do it, considering your knowledge of the corporate environment?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, anything that an institution or corporation or organization outputs is going to be reflective of that, of the core principles and the goings on and functions and innards of that institution. So when it comes to institutions, if you have education and institutions of higher education, you have that, but I mean, also colleges nowadays have a reputation for, pushing certain ideologies and indoctrinating certain folks with certain things. That's just what the consensus is. Whatever side of the aisle you sit on or anyone sits on is irrelevant. It's the fact that there's going to be that you have to navigate. But if it's to leverage these emerging technologies for the paying students' ultimate benefit, then of course it's something worth to be explored. It's just if it's then a vehicle to push certain elements of that institution's external views of the world, and if there's anything like that, that's where I think ethics, the ethics flag gets waved there. But is it important for institutions to develop their own in-house technologies? Of course, I would say, and to leverage. That's the whole idea. It's like, rather than everyone's right away like, well, how do you get your career in AI? Or where do I fit into this picture? Now, especially that the secret's out, it's more so like, with all of these tools at your disposal and access to them pretty fluidly, you you're now able to do exponentially more complex things. It doesn't have to be within AI.
Exactly.
Because you could slave away on these tools, or you can use it, like, for example, I had other vested interests in neuromorphic engineering, quantum machine learning, and computational neuroscience. So instead of just slaving away, I worked on all the three at Meta, but instead of just slaving away doing that and getting a nice salary as the flavor of the week, you can execute things that are orders of magnitude more complex and harder would be harder to do alone. Now's the time to perhaps start a company, because you need a lower headcount, or you don't need that $5,000 a year CPA to consult you. You have these tools. I mean, I think empowerment, I think it's really, like, for example, in using a large language model, I put in my name and there was an instance, I forget which one, but it said, that sounds like a mobster's name when I put in my full name. So, and it's funny because my high school principal said that to me in front of the entire student body, which is fine. Like, to me, I really don't care. I think it's humorous as you guys, but there's two courses of action in this present day. I could have, taken that instance, wrote a LinkedIn article about it, gotten the Wired coverage, like, anti-Italian discrimination violations.
Right.
I could have done that, or I could have ignored it and continued using GPT-4 Vision to do the complex tasks I needed to do, which I did the latter.
Right.
So that's what I mean. There's two tracks of thought, it seems.
And I agree with that.
And like, what would me making a big storm in a glass of water about that and complaining to the manufacturer? And then they're like, okay, we're gonna have it not say anything about the mafia when they hear an Italian name. But in the end, who was that harming on any real scale? And then also, what did it gain me to have that corrected?
Right.
Not really anything, just ignoring it and not caring.
And that's what I was talking about by not capitulating to that circular firing squad when people have different views about, civic engagement, philosophy,
Correct.
etc. It's a technology that has been given to the public nowadays so that you can actually work with it to build your own large language model using their, resources, their compute power. Right now, that's the largest problem, because compute power is the currency for doing this stuff. If you don't have massive GPUs and, crackpot engineering team with data scientists and philosophers and psychologists, and historians, etc. As an education institution, you're still going to miss the mark, because all of that has to be included. What corporate America is doing is building something to make them money. The existing LLMs, correct me if I'm wrong, are built off of scraping the internet and other digital data that is available, and that's what it's used.
We have, I see Ben is on, and I'd like to hear from Ben though, but since we have all these educators in here, okay. Good, hey Ben, well, since we have all these educators, to me, that's a great segue also on how our educators are going to utilize it and educate us, or how is it going to utilize it to be monetized for the school as well?
It's a great question, but I want to make sure that
Yeah.
Ben has the space to kind of simultaneously raise his hand, right, as you point them out. So Ben.
So Ethan, I want to comment on one of the things that you brought up. So you mentioned that, like, one of the large kind of like barriers to entry is needing to have like a massive amount of compute to kind of like leverage these tools or build your own. And I think that there isn't enough kind of like hype and discussion happening towards the open source models or the open source models that are taken and quantized so that they can be run on less and less required compute power, like the Mistral and the Llama models that can come out. Some of them, the smaller number of parameter ones, you can run on your personal computer or even down to like a Raspberry Pi 4 or 5. It's not going to be like blazing fast, but it is going to be a lot more accessible than running like, I think Snowflake just released their open source model that requires a cluster of 8 H100 GPUs. So like the comparison is definitely there. Like the enterprise like open source stuff isn't available for a Foothill student who wants to kind of like take it and make it their own. But a lot of the open source stuff like is a lot more accessible and has less barriers to entry. You can download LM Studio and some of the open source models with like a ThinkPad and still like be good to go for the most part.
And that's true.
Yeah.
Educators.
Sorry, say that again?
Oh, I'm just saying, I think that's a great segue for us to hear how you guys, all the educators here, see and value, AI and going forward, how to utilize it. If we're gonna accept it, not accept it. I mean, last year we had the guy from Stanford who was saying how, we need to open up and we need to accept it, because it's here. Just like electric cars, it's here, you can't change it. So I'd like to hear from the educators, how they think about it, about the use of it. Something as simple as ChatGPT, not something as large as what these guys are talking about.
Public access, my opening statement, go back to 1993, 1994. Public access to what used to be controlled information. You guys are way too young for this, but there is a service called Dialogue, right? And only limited people had access to do really precise searches. Internet changed that overnight, public records, right? And so, yes, there's an acceleration of AI technology, which is in the very narrow, maybe 2-3% of the population is developing it. But 95% of us have access to that intelligence, to that compute, not at the full power, but, to your question, if students, in my opinion, if students put this to use, they wouldn't be struggling with a question at 11 o'clock at night. They would be able to work through a practice exam and have a tutor at their level help them really to succeed in preparing for a midterm. Or if they made mistakes on an exam, help me understand what I don't understand. Help me remediate where I am in this class.
So can I comment on that, Bob? I think that using that technology outside of class, we had a big survey done recently, just this at the school, student population, right? How are you using ChatGPT in particular, in general? And it seemed like the majority of students are using it one way or another. There's very few students that are just like completely oblivious that it exists. So I think like students are doing things, right? What they are doing outside of class, I think is going to be a huge variation. However, I think the other side of that is, what are students doing with the technology inside the classroom? And when it comes to that, there's such a wide, varying views from instruction that it's part of what we're trying to figure out, right? How can we make the technology tool not something that's necessarily a negative thing in education, right? Because there's this worry of cheating and, I think we have to reimagine what that word means, right? So, and our teachers are here, they can comment more about that. But
Chessa had her hand up too around the time.
oh, sorry, yeah, Chessa, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just talking about kind of how I use it in my classes. I mean, I feel like what's unfortunate is that when people talk about AI, they kind of talk about it like a monolith, but really, like, I try to tell my students there's different forms. There's ChatGPT, there's Grammarly, there's like recommendation algorithms, there's all these different forms of AI that you're already using. And what's sad is that I mean, in conversations with colleagues as well, they kind of see it as monolithic, and therefore it becomes this blanket, like, we have to ban AI. And I'm like, well, it's already everywhere. And so for me, what I try to do is have more of like critical AI literacy. Like, what are the tools? How do they work? What are their limitations? What are their benefits? What tools are good for which tasks? Because I feel like, if we kind of look at it monolithically, then we're really misunderstanding the nuance and the ways that they are different forms of tools, and therefore some are better at certain jobs than others. And I think that, again, also the monolithic perspective kind of perpetuates this culture of distrust, where teachers or a lot of faculty automatically assume their students are cheating with it, when really, like, they might be using AI because Grammarly, they have like they added the extension or the plugin into their Google Docs or something like that, and so they might be using it without like intentionally knowing that they're using it, or like knowing that that is AI. So that's why I also think it's important to like kind of have more nuance in the conversation about which tools are we talking about.
So is there such thing as faculty bias? I mean, is the faculty biased against the use of it? And would they grade differently if someone used it or not, or?
I'm not sure if you're asking me, but I think that I can't speak, I don't want to generalize about faculty because there's so many different like responses to AI. Some folks are like, yes, I embrace it. Let's use it in my class. Let's, try to critique its output. Let's try to write better prompts. And there are some people who are like, I just don't want anything to do with AI in my class, and everything it's banned. So it's really hard to generalize. But one of the themes that has emerged with the faculty I talk to is just it's ruining people's ability to think critically. And I feel like I don't necessarily agree with that. I feel like if folks don't understand how the tools work, then yes, it's hard to use them with that critical thinking lens. But that's why I feel like, for me as an educator, it's incumbent upon me to kind of teach people what the tools are and how they work, and to the best of my ability. I'm not a computer scientist. Yeah.
I'm just curious, can faculty tell an AI generated response versus?
Can we tell?
Yeah.
I can give my personal experience. I get a sense, right? I mean, I have had some experiences where, the actual work product said, as an AI,
All right, that's a sure giveaway.
But also, if you're engaging with your students, you can tell differences between work product. And sometimes you can say, oh, that's not what they did before. I did experiment with detectors, and I found that was part of when I first started kind of engaging with AI in the classroom. And I think I had personally like this punitive lens, which I don't think was productive for me. And what I found is that thinking about it through an exploratory lens, or what are the opportunities, then I can to chase the point about this monolith. It's not really a monolith. There's so many different uses to it, and how could we be educated enough? How could I be educated enough, disciplined enough to know when to use it, how to not just because Chase, you mentioned about critical thinking, like squashing critical thinking, but could it be used to encourage or create or make critical thinking even better? And that's in my classes, I try to engage that way with students. Because they what are the opportunities.
But the detectors, you'd mentioned that you had tried to use some of the AI detectors with that.
They're awful. I mean, for me, sometimes they said that it was 100%, and then I had a conversation with the student and it was, what was the other way? It was 50%.
I just wanted to jump in on the AI detection topic, because I feel like that is really where you see the digital divide, and on multiple levels. Like, I see that faculty who maybe don't understand or like aren't as like willing to learn how AI works, we tend to rely more on detectors. And since the detectors are not that great, then they're kind of using a tool that's probably not serving them. But also students who are really savvy at using large language models can easily get around AI detection. So if you're using AI detectors, then you're kind of like, again, promoting this culture of distrust while also kind of sort of rewarding people who are very savvy around how to like train an AI model to speak more like them and those kinds of things. So that's my take.
You sort of open the door to something important on critical thinking. And for all of us that are using these tools to get, to decrease cognitive load and drudgery, these tools create information at 10 or 100 and probably sooner or later, 1,000 times faster than we can absorb it. And I found myself using these tools in some tasks, administrative tasks, right? And I thought, I need to stop and read what it's telling me because I'm asking it to go back and do iterative work and I really haven't read what's coming out of it. So I'm getting more and more detached from my work product.
Oh, okay.
So I'm creating material that I'm not really facile with. There are, interestingly, not to shift the point, I reviewed an article, it was a peer-reviewed article for applied science in a pretty nice journal. And as a reviewer, I just went in there and I wanted to quickly understand the article. So I uploaded to GPT and I asked it to create a summary and an outline and give me your take on what it offers to the community. And maybe some I don't think I asked for positives and negatives on the first round. And so I looked at it and I thought, okay, so I'm going to go back and read the article real quickly, sort of skimmed it. And I found all the things, all the nuances that the model found that I might not have caught. And then I went to, this is where the fun begins. I went to really create my review, which, I read the article, I read GPT, and I really thought about, does this article contribute to the field? And I missed this little opening prompt from the reviewer, from the journal that says, you will not use GPT tools at any point in this review. And you have to check a box that says you will not use GPT tools. And I was like, well, dang, maybe if I do that. But did it really influence, what I thought? And I think here's where a prompt in the bias comes in, because I did ask GPT, can you list where does this article contribute to the field? What does it do really well? And are there any missing pieces that we might suggest to the author, right? Which is what a reviewer does. And of course, the tool just crushes it, right? And now I have to go back and think, how do I reword this? Or do I just tell the journal that I had to bail, right? And I'm sort of halfway between. But this gets to critical thinking, is that we're using these hugely powerful tools and we're not really absorbing the value that it puts out, because we're moving at human clock speed and this system is moving at an entirely different speed. And once we really get into automation of tasks, what is this called? Anagenic reasoning, or am I mixing up terms? But it's like, this stuff is really going to get away from people so that we're not really absorbing all the value. We're just creating information to share with others. They might be reading it with their GPT, right? And we're never having this contact, right, with the author. It was like, I thought it was well written. I would have liked to have seen this topic, which is all I ended up saying. And I ended up saying, I thought my students could get value from it. Not what we really pay reviewers for.
Okay.
Oh, I think Ben also had. Well, I guess, so I've just been really thinking about, and because I've also been thinking about this digital divide kind of 3.0 that we're somewhat discussing because of the students that I work with. And what is so interesting to me is like, so I don't even use ChatGPT, and I think I don't know if it's necessarily a fear or just like going down the rabbit hole, but I just haven't used it. And I feel like I'm just relying on my own brain to create the efficiencies that I need. But hearing even like your example, Robert, of the ways that people can use it, and then the layers of and even you, Chester, kind of talking about how much you've had to educate yourself on the various tools. I think that's what scares me, is there's so much to learn about. And just like jumping into that makes it even harder to think about how to do it. And if I just start using it, will I fall into this rabbit hole of becoming, I don't know, there's a lot that I'm processing. And then I'm thinking about how do we work with students to build their skills? Because really it's about how do they use this to their benefit. And some people mentioned earlier, I mean, it's not only about like helping you in school, but it's helping you professionally, whether it's your resume or preparing for interviews. And so I'd love to hear just from instructors who have been using it. And I know Chessa, it sounds like you've been using it a lot. How are you training your students? And how are you helping them overcome, whether it's their fear, for the ones that aren't using it especially, or the ones that aren't using it beyond the tell me the answer here, right? Like, because there's so many more nuanced ways to use it. How do you do that? And how are you training your students to do that?
So, Ben had his hand up, did you, and try
Sure.
in person.
And then see what, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was gonna comment on a couple of different things that have been talked about in the realm of the, like like it was brought up, like the divide of like embracing versus kind of like penalizing and saying like no Chat GPT, no LLMs at all. And through kind of my own use of these tools, I've thought a lot about that. Through education, the goal is to kind of have students solve the problem, and through solving the problem, they learn the concept. But since students are already using the tools, it's easier to be like, Chat GPT, solve this problem, and then that completes their expectation, but it sidesteps the teacher's hope of them learning the concept. And I think one of the ways in which educators can kind of like step up and reroute things is how can we, or how can y'all teach students to do what they're already doing, but in a way that will kind of like relink that learning the concept to solving the problem, right? I'm struggling with this, integration, and I don't really want to learn like y x plus h. I just want to use the derivative operator. I can just have ChatGPT break it down for me and give me the solution, but I'm not really going to understand it. And so when I build everything else on top of it, I'm going to have that hole in my understanding. But if I go to the student and I say, hey, if you're already using this, tell ChatGPT exactly the things that you're struggling with understanding, and have a mock conversation with it as a collaborator instead of just a problem solver. And in that way, you're reframing it to think critically with the things that you're struggling with, rather than just using it as a magic compute box.
Yeah, like the skill of read and summarize this article. Boom. Gone.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then sadly, you won't even know what you're missing because you stopped using it, right? And that's not healthy. And it's like in chemistry, help me balance this equation versus balance this equation. There's a mountain of difference, right? Help me balance this equation. I'm lost. Help me understand the chemistry, what's going on, and tell me something cool about it, right? And then after you give me this answer, I want you to ask me 3 general questions about it.
I love that as an example of what a teacher could actually do. Like those actual, like, because what mine is now going is, what do STEM instructors need? And I'm guessing a lot of that is, I think, like you said, the prompt, right? What are various prompts you can ask? And I love that idea of like, give me back 3 questions for me to answer to test my understanding.
Context, direction, and intent. And I learned this from, his last name is White, and I can't remember his first name. It was one of the courses I took through Coursera. And you literally spend 2 hours learning how to have the model ask you questions. And you create this iterative back and forth. And that's where learning begins, right? Because now the student has an on-demand office hour with an extremely patient teacher who's willing to work with you. And again, context, direction, and intent. You can say, I'm an intro chemistry student. I desperately want to pass this class, and my math sucks. So please, can you help me step by step? understand and break down what this equation is about. And then tell me something cool about this.
That's
Help me share this with another person.
And that is a new skill.
yeah,
Yes.
It's called engineering prompting.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And that's something that all students need to learn.
Right.
When they get to college, they need to start learning it in
You need to learn it in high school,
Yeah.
or, right? How to have that conversation,
Right.
right? You know, a patient thing, and you know, as a child, you don't go to your parents and say, I know I'm only 8 years old and I don't understand the purpose of this, right? But help me understand why you're asking me to do this task, right? I mean, but you can do that with a model.
Yeah.
So my son did that to me.
Do you find that you're starting to prompt people in your conversation?
We would have those type of conversations where I would prompt him
To
See?
give you certain answers.
to give certain answers.
He does that to me too.
Because we're learning to program, and when you learn to have a conversation with a computer, you're learning to program. And then you realize, when I have a conversation with you, I can think I'm having a conversation with a human, but you could be a computer behind that face. Different, right? But I wanna have a valuable interaction with you and have us both lead, you know, for the better.
Just ahead.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to respond back to what you were saying, Sophia. I think is, well, first your kind of sentiment, like there's so many tools, it's really overwhelming, and that's like so real. And I just want to have empathy for that. Like a lot, like when I say that there are faculty who just want to ban it, I'm not like criticizing them, because I know that everybody has like different capacities for their ability to like learn these new tools and adopt them. So just like lots of love and patience for the folks who are like, I am so overwhelmed with everything else I'm doing that I just can't do this right now. So just want to make that clear. But then also give a couple of examples for what I've done. And I know I teach English, but I teach a critical thinking class where they have to do research. And so really what I do is just give them a compare and contrast. I say, if I were to do this research assignment, here's what it would look like if I use ChatGPT, here's what it would look like if I use Google Scholar, and here's what it would look like if I use the De Anza library. And I just say, you can pick whichever one you want, but I want you to explain why you chose that method and what worked for you and what didn't work. So again, it's really like, what were the benefits of this tool, and what like could it have done better that another tool could have done? And then for my more literary classes, I actually, at first I give students the option. I was like, this is one option where you can use ChatGPT, but I know some students are like, I'm really afraid. So I say, you don't have to do it. But for the ChatGPT one, I say, you basically have to ask the chatbot to write you a story. And I give them a specific generic prompt. It's like a story about aliens that come to Earth and are disappointed with how humans treat animals. It's a literature class on animals. And they have to keep refining the prompt until they get the story that they want. And the product that they submit is not the story, it's actually their analysis of the interaction. I was like, why do you think that prompt gave you that output? Like, what did this teach you about writing with these tools? And, you know, what does it teach you about like kind of being human in general? So those are just a couple examples.
That's cool.
We got a couple people that came in later, and I don't know if they want anything to say. You guys, So one of the things I wanted to ask was, and this may be not an intelligent question, but is there a way of taking what, on this level of education, what we're talking about, as far as the use of AI and ChatGPT, and the romanticism of the way they talk about AI and how it's built out and grow? Is there a way of combining that to create a greater understanding of it, or is it oil and water, you know, because I don't know how to ask that question, but is it just a way of taking where it's going and where it's starting and kind of mix it and see how we can attract students' attention to it? Does that make sense? No? Okay, well, next question.
Try it again, Carl.
No, I was just trying to figure out because as a concert promoter, I can take a cat who knows absolutely nothing about building a stage. And with my level of experience, I can, by the end of the day, he can be proficient in backline gear by the end of the day, because of what he don't know, I can teach him a way, my way, which I've got 43 years of experience. When he leaves, he has his way, my way, of doing the process. So it's the same thing, like, these guys are brainchild. But if I come into school and don't know anything about it, how do we combine where we're going? Or to where I'm starting at, and to say, by the end of the day, I can know something.
I get your question now. You're asking, how can we create a pathway for people to actually embrace and learn how to use the technology? And in a larger sense, how to build on top of the technology. I think that the first thing is to get them to a point of not fearing it, or have them be at a state of being where they have time to do it. What's the name? Robert just said he spent 2 hours on a course, and he learned how to prompt the LLM to
Jules White.
He's
an adjunct faculty.
Okay. So you have to be in a space where you're ready and willing to learn, I think, is the first thing. And as has been previously mentioned, some educators might just, I don't have the bandwidth for one more thing right now. So you got to give, people time. And with any new technology, there's early adapters, and then there's laggers, and there's people in the middle, right? Eventually we all get there. It's just a matter of when, because when change happens, it's for everybody. And you either swim or you sink like a rock. It's no two ways about it. Our world is tremendously different now because of the internet and social media and the ability to do e-commerce. Back in the early 90s, when we were working on all of this technology, people wouldn't touch a computer. I remember having conversations with people who were like, I would never put my information on something like that. But what happened was, the next generation, their kids, started to use the computer. And for one reason or another, they didn't have the same reservations about their privacy, right? They didn't have the same reservations about people sharing information, on the platform with them. And it brought out a lot about society as a whole that we always do, but we never grappled with, right? When I was growing up, they had these commercials like, don't ever, talk to somebody that you don't know, stranger danger, right? But today, you have situations where people are actually communicating over the internet or social media that don't know each other, and they get, locked into views and bullied and all sorts of things, psychologically, mentally, and physically, that, society has to deal with at some point. But right now, we don't really have any laws around social media. And that's mainly because the big companies have a lot of money to lobby our elected officials. But back to the education aspect of it, give people time, put a plan together, have a process in place so that when they do have that extra time, they can, you know, at their own pace, have a resource to learn and learn it the right way versus struggling with it on their own, perhaps. That's just a suggestion.
We got 15 minutes left before I devour a couple slices of pizza. And I know this is your normal time to with your group to talk about AI. Last week you talked about having groups, forming groups, and kind of segue from what E had mentioned about taking your time and have a plan. Can you or anyone here, can you guys just say where you think Foothill is going towards the use of ChatGPT or AI and LLM and ChatGPT and all these other names and numbers and the alphabet?
So I think there's two separate things. The groups that, I don't want to get too into the weeds of the group, but you know, there's so many different parts to how AI is going to affect education that I think you do need focus groups on certain aspects. Like for instance, a policy group or a curriculum group or a group that figures out the best tools for us to be more productive, not just as teachers, but as other roles on campus as well, right? So we had to figure that out. Where are we going as a college? Hard to say. I mean, we have a new class in curriculum, ethics of AI, that's a class now. It'll begin, I believe, fall, maybe midwinter, I can't remember. But we don't have like a person at the school that's like, hey, I'm the AI expert educator person, right? That person doesn't exist, like with heavy programming background or, you know, diverse different areas of AI. We would love to have a person like that to help guide us through curriculum development, because curriculum is a very slow process, bureaucratic process. You know, you think of an idea today, and your class might be available to be offered in 2 years, right? Well, 2 years from now, the AI landscape is probably going to look massively different than what it does now.
Yes.
And so how we have to somehow figure out a way that we are able to help educate our populations here, the people who work here and the students that learn here, of what tools are available to them now. Because by the time a course is created and they can take the course for credit, it might even just be irrelevant at that point. So that's a real challenge, I think. And then there are great efforts being done in terms of workshops. Chestnut is a spearhead putting on workshops district-wide now, which I think is amazing for our community to have the opportunity to learn about some of these things now, right? We gave a few workshops last quarter, right? And in Parkside down there. And so I think that's part of it, right? But I don't think anyone has the tell-all-tale solution about what we should do. I keep thinking about what Ethan was saying about the kids in school now in K through 12, what are they doing? Right? And I don't really hear much about that. It doesn't sound like they're doing much.
And that's what the issue is, and we can't point to the biases in the LLMs that exist out there, the transformers that are open source now, and we don't want to use that to build tools to facilitate helping those kids K through 12. It just that's something that one of my companies that I'm starting up is working on, and it's such an early time in this era. I mean, over the last 18 months, like, things have exploded. And they've been working on this. How many years have you said you've been working in it for 10 years?
Exclusively, yes.
Yeah, so-
Conversational AI and NLP.
So they've been working on it for at least 10, 15 years, right? But only in the last 18 months has the public, right, been exposed to it, and look what it's done.
Yeah, we were doing AI workshops like 7 years ago. Yeah, it's because it's a technology that was still early on, but you're right. That whole public facing,
Right.
accessible, right, to everyone has just turned this into an entirely different scenario.
Yeah.
But you know, I have $2, but $2. You got $2 too. Slip of the tongue. I had $2, one in 5th grade and one in 8th grade. And I would, you know, I think of them like they never, ever, ever talk about these chat GPTs. Ever. They're all on the phones and the tablets doing stuff. None of that is the chat GPT. And I think like when I was in middle school, that's when the computers were kind of first coming out, you know, the old big gigantic computers with floppy disks. And at that time, the school I went to, they, for whatever reason, thought that we should be being exposed to some of that stuff, right? So I kind of view it in a similar way. It's like, well, why aren't educators in that space
Exposed.
like it's using that
Exactly.
from the students, right? Because they may come here eventually, and then where's that gap? Right? So I don't know that.
Well, there are groups like Green Scholars, Street Code Academy, East Open Youth Development Center, Hidden Genius. And some of the work that he does in the community that are teaching from kindergarten or starting at kindergarten. And going through, that's taking it out of the public school system and making it private and paying for it.
There are some very active groups in the Senator County Office of Education that are looking at AI and CS. Zach and I have been to some of the meetings, and there are teachers that are very, they're asking all the same questions we're talking about. And they're having meetings among their faculty and meetings within the different districts, also within the county. And there is a lot of work going on at the Kraus Center for Innovation. And they would welcome any of us to join them in these activities.
I mean, you mentioned KCI, that's here, that's a Foothill thing, right? But in general, the public educational system serves just massive amounts of students, right? And it's not like I mean, maybe I'm wrong, I haven't seen anything being like, hey, we're gonna approach at least this 1 hour blog once a week on AI or something like that, right?
We're actually, they've approached to it once a month for 2 hours.
At KCI?
It's sponsored by KCI. It's a teacher out in, I think he's in Modesto. High school teacher in Modesto is sharing it.
Yeah, so to your point, Mike, that's great. KCI is one little organization.
I agree,
You know,
but what they're developing is a statewide connection among school districts in doing this. And I think it's a model that stuff we should look at, see what they're doing.
Yeah, ironically, if you've ever looked at Common Core standards. And you go from curriculum before Common Core, and then you look at Common Core, as an educator, you go, wow, this is tricky. How are we gonna merge these concepts across different disciplines? You know, this is hard to think about as an educator. You have multiple programs, your faculty are operating on silos, and yet Common Core, right? Sophia looks for integration. It looks for broad overarching concepts. This is where large language models just absolutely excel.
Absolutely.
You could go to a large language model and say, I'm a K-12 teacher, your context, right? And my chair asked me to think about how we're going to integrate Common Core across math, biology, and let's throw in something social.
Yeah.
Give me some hints. And I'm always astounded with how thoughtful the response is. it gives me one idea I might have thought of, and 10 I would have never thought of.
We have 7 minutes left, and is it okay, like, I know there's a lot of people online, and I see Teresa, who was talking about trying to do a STEM, yeah, I got your attention now, huh? Who was talking about doing a STEM school over there in Sunnyvale, and, I mean, if we can just I'd love to get people's 30-second outtakes on what they just think about, AI, or the advent of it, or bringing it in, or not using it, and stuff like that. So I mean, I'd love to hear some people who hadn't said anything, and just give us something brief before we leave. We can start with you, Teresa.
I was just checking text messages, so you got me. I don't really have, I don't feel like I'm an expert on this at all. I don't, there's some imposter syndrome going on here. I think what I would say is the conversation about ethics, I think, really needs to start early. And it's not just about ethics of cheating, but that we have these huge data sets that we are voluntarily giving, whether through our watch, through the Oura Ring, or any sort of wearable technology. Those data sets are going to be, I mean, that's where I think it's wonderful. I think AI would be able to use those data sets for any sort of predictive whatevers. But it also sort of scares me. I mean, I was listening to the CEO of 23andMe talking about that. To think about that the genetic database that they hold now, and thinking about artificial intelligence on that entire genetic database, and what therefore is our responsibility for that. I've been reading about molecular biology and AI. That one really sort of, the ChatGPT stuff I love. I use AI every day in like my productivity tools. Like, Teresa, you have 3 to-dos. Bing, 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 bing. You haven't done them. Okay. Totally love that. But the AI and genetics and biology makes me freak out a little bit. So I think the conversation on AI, on ethics, should continue and maybe deepen into that realm. But those are just some things that are floating in my brain today. But I don't know that answers your question about K-12 or anything to that effect. But I think some of these other experts have better answers than I do. Thank you.
Anyone else online? I know, Chester, you had a lot of stuff to say, Ben. You guys, anyone else? Chester, you guys round us out.
I feel like we're kind of at peak AI discourse now. Like, in the next 2 or 3 years, we won't even talk about it because it's just everywhere. So I love that we're having this conversation, and appreciate that we're kind of thinking about directions. Really appreciate Zach for bringing, folks like me in from De Anza and building those bridges. So hopefully this can be kind of like a district-wide effort. So.
We appreciate the Anza folks joining the team, honestly, and it's great you're a district, and start style of college. And we are wrapping up time here, just with a few minutes just left to go, and I see Lene has her hand up. Please, Lene, let's have you have a final word.
Yeah, I want to just hop on Teresa's train just a little bit and say, I'm super excited by some of the things that AI is allowing us to do, and ways that we can use it to just crunch through an enormous amount of data so that we can maybe solve some of the hard problems we're facing. But as probably the only person I've talked to that did not like Oppenheimer, like, we are sitting at a place where we need to really critically be analyzing how we're using technology for good. And, there's pieces of technology that have been launched into our world that we are unable to take back now, that could be catastrophic. And we just want to make sure that this one is not catastrophic. So what is our role as educators as we engage in this conversation to make sure that ethics stays at the forefront of the conversation, and that we're in particular looking most carefully at any group of people that could be harmed by the technology. And so I mean, I want to thank the panel for raising the issues that you did and helping us move this forward in ways that are intentional and supportive of humanity.
Thanks, Lene. And I want to especially thank our guests that aren't necessarily part of the Foothill community. Ethan, thank you very much for bringing this thing with you. And Hero as well, thank you very much. And you're in the back over there, but thank you for also joining us. So that wraps up our time here today. I really appreciate the discussion, and you can of course continue this offline at any point. So thank you all. All right, y'all.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
So I have this.